Alrighty. All right, sir. So obviously we're here to. I want to ask you a couple questions about the lawsuit that was filed.
Yes.
If you could just tell us a little bit about what motivated, please.
You know, the governor made a decision, a political decision, to issue an executive order, and then his conduct in the 25th Congressional District showed a real question about the misuse of his executive powers. In looking at the law, he has no such authority. But more importantly, there are good ways to ensure that everyone who wants to vote can vote, and at their correct address. About 75%, 15 million out of 20 million registered voters in this state are absentee already. So there's only 5 million voters that are in this universe that need to be asked, do you want to vote absentee? And by the way, is your address correct? If we would do that through the Secretary of State, it would cost about $2.5 million, and we would get the people who want to vote, in recognizing there may not be polling places in November. And really, that's all we're asking the governor to do, is to recognize he didn't have the authority, but our registrar of voters here in San Diego County has the authority to send out mailers, get a buy-in for additional absentee, and should do so.
So with so many, though, who are already mail-in ballots, why is this that much of an issue? I guess is what I'm trying to understand. Is that yeah.
Well, first of all, the most important thing is rule of law. The governor doesn't have the authority. The legislature passed a bill. The governor signed it. He should live with it. But second of all, we have a challenge, which is that if you send out 5 million ballots that were unsolicited, several million ballots, including tens or hundreds of thousands at university dorms where the students aren't even going to be in those dorms, will be floating around. That simply creates economic confusion and electoral confusion. If you want to vote where you live, there's a good chance that a absentee ballot is going to your previous registration, which is probably a college dorm if you're a student. That's just one example, but there are many other examples. As you know, the counties have not cleaned for death and movement the rolls. So the 5 million people who did not vote in 2016, and practically the same amount in March, many of them will never vote because they don't live there or they're not even alive.
Do you believe that this could have a potential for fraud if it goes forward?
Well, obviously, if you send out 5 million unsolicited ballots to people who didn't know they were coming and didn't want them, have already moved, don't live there, you're going to have a problem. And again, it's ill-conceived, but the reason we filed the suit is the governor had no such authority, and there are remedies. We can get several million people good ballots that they know are coming by sending out solicitations to them and having them opt in, which is completely allowed and should be done.
And lost my train of thought here. So, if they went through that process, then you'd be okay with that. If they expanded, it's not an issue about I don't want to say voter suppression, but it's kind of what your opponent had inferred. Is that it's kind of
well, you know, look, everyone's always using terms that aren't true. The fact is that 15 out of 20 million people are going to get their ballots absentee because they asked for them. The remaining 5 million need to be asked if they want them, and if they want them, then they should get them. It's that simple, and we have plenty of time. It costs about 50 cents per voter to send those 5 million out and find out how many of them want them. If 4 million come back, I'll be delighted. If 1 million come back, return to sender, no one at that address, then in fact the state will have saved on over 1 million ballots that they won't be sending out because they shouldn't.
The lawsuit made reference that there was it would change. This would force your campaign to make adjustments and could increase the cost of a campaign. Could you explain the changes that this would make if it is allowed to stay, and how it could increase costs?
For everybody, if you have an unlimited pool of voters, then you really can't predict who's going to vote and on what basis. So it increases the if you will the basis of how many are going to vote. It also creates a considerable confusion because those who are not going to vote, you have to keep sending them information and addressing them even though they're not going to vote. Once somebody has voted, you stop corresponding with them in an election. The fact is that by election day in March, 3/4 of the people who had registered absentee had voted, and we were no longer communicating them by phone or by mail. And that was a relief to our costs. It was also a relief to the people who were tired of getting mail.
I see. So just to make sure I understand, so it's because you can track who has and hasn't submitted a ballot, and so you would have to then reach out to those people, however many are left on the rolls that received the ballot but haven't turned it in yet.
Right, and the governor's looking at increasing by 5 million the people, and the reality is several million of them won't vote. You know, we set up based on the law. We want the law to be obeyed. Here's the important thing. I want everyone to vote that wants to vote. I want to make sure they get a ballot at their correct address, and I want to make sure that it's as simple, easy, and predictable for them to vote. In CD 25, which became Mike Garcia's seat, the governor created tremendous confusion by first having a mail-in ballot and then opening polling places at will wherever he wanted to, with a political spin that even the LA Times thought was inappropriate.
Anything else you want to get out there? Anything to ask you about that you think folks understand?
I think the important thing is that we have a good registrar of voters here in San Diego County who can easily mail out to his share of those people that are not registered or currently asking for absentee. Ask them if they want it, encourage them, make them aware that it may be difficult to vote in November if the pandemic has returned, and get as many signed up for vote by ballot as possible. He also can help clean the rolls so that in November we're not mailing ballots to people who have moved or passed away.
Have you heard from him whether he plans to do this at all?
You know, in the primary, he sent out a number of mailers, including one advising people how they could vote in the Democratic primary if they were declined to state. So I would suspect that he's going to look at something to try to encourage as many people to be prepared to vote by mail. But of course, if he assumes that the governor's order stays into effect, then people would say that it wasn't necessary. But I think as long as there is a real doubt as to whether or not the governor had the authority, he should send it out and try to encourage as many people, not just in the 50th Congressional District, but in all of San Diego County, to register absentee. I believe that if you want to vote in November, it is best to vote absentee because we don't know what the polling places will be.